Something happened this morning that every single person on this planet needs to understand. Because it doesn't just affect oil prices or military strategy. It affects the price of your groceries, the cost of your gas, and whether the global economy tips into recession before summer. At 6:42 this morning, the United States military confirmed it had destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels operating near the Strait of Hormuz. Not drone boats, not patrol ships, mine-laying vessels, ships specifically designed to place explosive devices in the water that would detonate when tankers pass over them. And here is the part the headline version leaves out entirely. According to US naval intelligence intercepts cited by Reuters this morning, Iran had already successfully laid an undisclosed number of mines in the strait before those ships were destroyed. The mines are still there. And as of this broadcast, no oil tanker, not a single one, has successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz in the last 6 days. Zero. From 37 tankers per day to zero. In 11 days, I've been tracking every document, every filing, every intelligence report since Operation Epic Fury began on February 28th. The picture that emerges when you read the actual data, not the White House press releases, not the Pentagon briefings, is far more alarming than anything you've seen on the evening news. Let me show you exactly what's happening, why the administration's response has been riddled with false claims, and what this collapse of the world's most important shipping lane actually means for you, your money, and your food. Before we go deeper into the mine situation, the real state of US naval capability in the Strait, and the economic numbers that should be dominating every headline right now, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. This story is moving faster than any I've covered, and the next 72 hours will determine whether this becomes a full-scale global energy catastrophe or whether diplomatic channels find a way to reopen the waterway. Hit subscribe. Notifications on. You'll want to be here when it breaks. The Strait of Hormuz is a 21-mile wide channel of water between Iran and Oman. It sounds small, it isn't. Every single day, approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil and liquefied natural gas pass through that strait. That number represents roughly 20% of the entire world's daily energy consumption, transported through a stretch of water narrow enough that you could theoretically see across it on a clear day. Saudi Arabia's oil goes through it. Iraq's oil goes through it. Kuwait's oil goes through it. The UAE's oil goes through it. Qatar's LNG, the natural gas that heats homes across Europe and Asia, goes through it. The Strait of Hormuz is not just important, it is, by any objective measure, the single most economically critical piece of ocean on the planet. Iran has known this for decades. Iranian military doctrine has long included what strategists call the Hormuz card. The ability to threaten or disrupt the strait is Iran's single most powerful economic weapon. Not its nuclear program, not its missile arsenal. The strait. And as of March 2nd, 2026, Iran played that card for the first time in history with full operational effect. February 28th, Operation Epic Fury begins. US and Israeli forces launch coordinated strikes against Iran's nuclear facilities, missile infrastructure, and military leadership. The Natanz nuclear facility is hit. Fordo is hit. Revolutionary Guard command centers are destroyed. The operation is the most significant military action in the Middle East since the 2003 Iraq invasion. March 1st, the first domino falls. The oil tanker Skylight is struck by a projectile north of the Strait of Hormuz while transiting toward the Gulf. The crew is unharmed. The ship is not. It becomes the first of 5 commercial vessels to be attacked in the opening days of the conflict. March 2nd. This is the moment everything changes. A senior IRGC official goes on Iranian state television and makes an announcement that sends shockwaves through global energy markets. Quote, "The Strait of Hormuz is closed. Any vessel attempting to transit will be targeted. This is not a threat. It is a declaration. For the first time since the strait became the world's critical oil artery, Iran formally declared it closed to commercial shipping. Within 4 hours, maritime traffic has dropped 80%. Insurance companies begin refusing coverage for Gulf voyages entirely. March 3rd, supertankers, the enormous vessels that carry 2 million barrels of crude each, begin abandoning planned Gulf voyages. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, at least 14 supertanker operators redirect their routes away from the Persian Gulf within a 24-hour window. the world's largest moving objects, ships that don't turn quickly under any circumstances, suddenly reverse course. March 5th, Reuters publishes the number that defines the crisis. Daily tanker transits through the Strait of Hormuz. 0. Not reduced, not limited. 0. Down from 37 on February 27th, the day before the operation began. The world's most important waterway has effectively stopped functioning. And here is the detail Fortune magazine captures in its analysis from that day. Iran achieved this not through a declared military blockade requiring a naval fleet. Iran achieved it through fear. 5 tankers struck, 16 mine-laying ships operating in the lane, insurance companies walking away. That was enough. That is the setup. Now, the documents. I pulled the CSIS analysis, published 3 days ago. The Center for Strategic and International Studies, arguably the most respected defense think tank in Washington. Page 4, direct quote. Traffic estimates based on ship tracking data indicate that Iran has so far been largely successful in shutting down traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Critically, this includes Chinese-flagged vessels. No one, not even Beijing, is getting through. Read that again. Not even Beijing. China depends on Middle Eastern oil for 40% of its energy supply. China has a strategic partnership with Iran. China was reportedly pre-briefed about this conflict before the public announcement. And even China cannot get its tankers through the strait right now. When the country with the most incentive and the most political cover to defy the blockade is staying away, that tells you everything about how dangerous those waters have become. But here is what got me. Page 7 of the same CSIS document. Quote, the U.S. Navy's current posture in the Gulf does not support sustained escort operations for commercial vessels. The combination of Iranian mine threat, missile capability, and drone swarm tactics creates a threat environment that would require dedicated minesweeping operations, sustained aerial coverage, and significant surface vessel commitment before commercial transit becomes viable under escort protection. That's not my interpretation. That is CSIS. Put those together, the world's most important oil lane is shut down. Even Chinese tankers aren't going through. And the U.S. Navy, with 2 carrier strike groups in the region, has said in the assessment of the most respected defense analysts in Washington that it cannot currently escort commercial vessels safely. I went through this 3 times. The pattern is clear. Now, what nobody is covering, the oil price story is real. Yes, crude hit $114 a barrel before briefly spiking toward $120 before settling back near $110 this morning, following Trump's statement that the war is very complete. Markets are volatile, not recovering. But the oil story is only half of what's happening at Hormuz. The half nobody is covering could actually be more devastating in the long run. Fertilizer. Near half of the world's urea, the primary nitrogen fertilizer that grows the food you eat, passes through the Strait of Hormuz. Qatar is one of the world's largest producers of nitrogen-based fertilizers. The shipping lanes that move those fertilizers to the agricultural regions of South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Africa run directly through the strait. And right now, none of that fertilizer is moving. The Guardian published the data last Wednesday. Quote from Tobin Fraser, fertilizer market analyst at ICIS, the global fertilizer supply chain faces significant disruption if the effective closure of the strait persists. We are now 11 days into this closure. The planting season in South and Southeast Asia begins in 6 to 8 weeks. If fertilizer doesn't reach those markets in the next 3 weeks, crop yields for the 2026 season will fall significantly. 3 weeks, not 3 months. 3 weeks before the damage becomes irreversible for this year's global harvest. Wheat, corn, rice, the staple crops that feed billions of people, all of them facing a fertilizer supply shock because a 21-mile strait is shut down. The Independent put it plainly, quote, the real threat from a Strait of Hormuz closure isn't an oil shortage, it's a global food crisis. The global food system has far thinner margins than the global oil system. That story got less attention than the $100 barrel headlines. It deserves significantly more. Read that again. Oil is recoverable. You can tap strategic reserves. You can reroute routes slowly. Food supply chain disruption from a missed planting season cannot be recovered in the same way. The farmers in Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Nigeria who won't receive fertilizer this month will produce smaller harvests in October. Your grocery store will feel it in late 2026 and through 2027. Fallout already hitting globally. Iraqi oil production has collapsed 70%, from 4.3 million barrels per day to 1.3 million. Iraq's storage facilities are full. The remaining output is being rerouted to domestic refineries. Southern export terminals are set to halt entirely. The Iraqi government, which depends on oil revenue for 93% of its budget, is facing a financial crisis within weeks, all within 72 hours of the Reuters report. That fast. That's just the first layer of what's actually happening. There's more. Keep watching. Okay, but look, I have to be fair here. The other side has a point. Several points, actually. The Trump administration's defenders argue the economic disruption is temporary, and that the strategic objective, eliminating Iran's nuclear program and military infrastructure, justifies short-term pain. They point to Operation Epic Fury's documented successes. The Natanz nuclear facility is destroyed. Fordo is destroyed. Iran's missile stockpiles have been substantially degraded. These are real military achievements with real long-term security value. Senator Tom Cotton put it directly this week. A few weeks of elevated oil prices is a small price to pay for permanently eliminating Iran's nuclear threat to Israel and American forces. You can disagree with that calculation, but it's not an irrational one. Second point, the administration argues that the Hormuz closure is not permanent and that Iran's ability to sustain it is limited. As Iran's own military infrastructure is degraded by continued US-Israeli strikes, the capacity to threaten or enforce a blockade diminishes. This is a reasonable argument. Iran's navy has already suffered significant losses. US strikes on March 10th destroyed 16 mine-laying vessels specifically to degrade the blockade capability. Third point, and this is the one the media consistently underplays. The world has more strategic petroleum reserve capacity today than at any point in history. The United States alone holds approximately 370 million barrels in reserve. Saudi Arabia has significant additional capacity. If the closure remains temporary, measured in weeks, not months, the strategic reserve system may be able to absorb the shock without triggering a full recession. Bjorn Lomborg, author and economist, argued on Thursday that the panic is disproportionate to the actual likely duration of the disruption, and that markets are pricing in worst-case scenarios rather than probable ones. Fair point. Markets routinely overshoot in crises. Look, I'm not here to tell you who's right. If you read this situation as a catastrophic, avoidable economic disaster triggered by a war of choice, the evidence supports that interpretation. If you read it as a necessary short-term disruption to achieve long-term security objectives, the evidence supports that interpretation too. Both can be true. That's what makes this complicated. But here's what neither side is debating seriously enough. The mine situation, one I just described, Iran laying mines in the Strait this morning, is not something that goes away when the shooting stops. Mines are not withdrawn when ceasefires are signed. They have to be found and physically removed. The US Navy's mine-sweeping capability in the Persian Gulf has atrophied significantly over the past decade. The last dedicated US minesweeper fleet in the Gulf was downsized in 2019. Rebuilding that operational capability takes time. Even if Iran agreed today to cease all hostile action, reopening the strait to commercial traffic would require weeks of mine-clearing operations with significant risk. That is not a talking point. That is naval doctrine.